Hi there, Steve Kaufmann here. Today I want to talk about a subject that is very close to my heart. Perhaps the one thing besides languages that I get most interested in, along with a few others, but it's the issue of citizenship and citizenship in a mobile world. And I'm thinking of starting another blog on this subject, and I would like your advice and opinions. I would like advice on whether I should do the blog in typepad or if there is some better way to do it. I've been starting to use Posterous, and I find it quite convenient, but I'm still not very experienced in this whole, setting up of blogs. So any advice will be handy. And the other thing is just what you think of the idea. Now let me explain what I mean by citizenship. And I'm going to begin by referring to a few things that I have been commenting on at my existing blog, The Linguist on Language, and that I have been reading about. First of all, I commented about an article that appeared in the local newspaper, the Vancouver Sun, by a professor at the local University of British Columbia. His name was Henry Yu. He's of Chinese origin, although born in Canada. And he complained that people of Chinese or Asian origin weren't being promoted fast enough, and that the city was increasingly Asian and it wasn't being recognized, and that therefore we should have more Asian languages in our schools. And he, of course, specifically referred to Chinese, and he seemed to imply that anyone like him who was born here or who moved here after the age of 10 and therefore lost his or her ancestral language was very unfortunate, and so forth and so on. Well, leaving aside the fact that if he wants to learn Chinese, he should just go out and learn it like I did. But it's the larger issue of what does it mean to be, say, a Canadian in this particular instance, and should there be special allowances for people of certain origins? Should the origins or ethnic origins of people be reflected in the education system and so forth and so on? So what does it mean to be a Canadian citizen in this situation? So that was one situation. That was this article that appeared, and I answered him, and that was also printed in the Vancouver Sun, and both those articles can be found at my blog. Another sort of interesting situation is the one that's developing in the Ukraine, or Ukraine as they now call themselves, not the Ukraine, where you have sort of a western part of the Ukraine, which historically was part of Poland or the Austro-Hungarian Empire or whatever, and the eastern part, which has stronger Russian connections, both under, I guess, the Tsarist period and even under the Soviet period. A lot of people from Russia emigrated down there. A lot of the Ukrainians who live there speak Russian more than they speak Ukrainian. And so you have the sort of internal divide within Ukraine between the West and the East, which is reflected in the recent presidential election. But at the same time, even those predominantly Russian-speaking Ukrainians still identify as Ukrainians, and yet they're not that much different from the Russian-speaking Russians just across the border in the eastern part of Ukraine. I mean, we could say the same about Switzerland, Germany, Austria, where they all come together. Those people are historically the same tribe, if you want. I'm reading a book on the history of Scotland, and I guess it was 1707 or whatever, Scotland voted to form a union with England because there were a lot of commercial advantages. But of course it was a very controversial decision. Some were for, some were against. And so you've had sort of an ebb and flow of Scottish nationalist feeling. One of the interesting things is, from this book, it turns out that many of the trappings of what it is to be Scottish, like the kilt and the Highland warrior image, that in fact for the longest time the Highlanders were looked down upon by the Lowlanders, who are far more numerous, and yet all of a sudden their clothing and their customs are identified as national symbols. And in fact the Highlanders were I think, predominantly Catholic for a long time, and so there's all kinds of religious, Protestant Catholic rivalry going on. And what's more, a lot of those Highland Scots actually emigrated over from Ireland in earlier history. And yet out of all of that, you have this sense of Scottish citizenship. One of the interesting things too in this book, they mention the fact that there was this dramatic increase in emigration from Europe in the latter half of the 19th century. 44 million people left Europe. They left countries, obviously, from Spain. They went to Latin America. From other places like Ireland, Scotland, and Norway had the highest percentage of people leaving, like 1 million out of 5 or something. 20% emigrated. And then of course from Eastern Europe people emigrated, and so forth. Why did they emigrate? Because all of a sudden there was steamship travel. So the interesting phenomenon again is that the world became more mobile, and a very high percentage of people who emigrated eventually went back to their country of origin. So, something like 30, 40, 50% of people from Scotland or other countries emigrated to the United States or Canada, and half of them, or 30, 40% of them, went back home again. So we have this sense of mobility. Well, the world is much, much more mobile today, and people can stay in touch with their culture of origin much more easily. They can move around much more easily. And so all of this then brings into question, what are the responsibilities of citizenship? And here in Canada, we have a government that has taken the Ministry of Multiculturalism and changed it into the Ministry of Multiculturalism. They've merged it with the Citizenship Ministry, and they've published a sort of a citizenship guide, and they're trying to move the sense of multiculturalism, which was the politically correct position here, the one that is still promoted in our universities and schools, and that is that the more varied we are, the better. Everybody's culture is good. We don't have one. So whatever strange customs people have when they come here, that those should be respected and have pride of place here. Now people are beginning to realize that there is a limit to this, that there are some customs in some countries that we're just not going to accept. So once we've understood that there's a limit to what we will accept, it could be female circumcision, it could be eating dogs, it could be any number of things, then we begin to sort of back away. And we also notice that there are people who come to Canada, for example, and who maintain a loyalty to their country of origin or to some other ideology, like a religion for that matter, and that this other attachment, whether it be to Serbia, China, Israel, Islam, Sri Lanka, whatever it might be, this seems to take precedence over their attachment to Canada. Now, from the perspective of a country like Canada, if you have 10-15% of the population who are more attached to some other place, it's probably not a big deal, but as we have more and more immigration, it begs the question, what if we end up with a country where everybody is more attached to somewhere else? And so the whole question of citizenship in a mobile world is the one that I want to start talking about and writing about and getting on videos and to have as a subject of discussion, to get views about. And if people are interested in this for their English learning, and I could do some in other languages, in French, but I'm not a native speaker of those other languages, and perhaps put out transcripts, and so we can have a lively discussion on this subject, and at the same time generate some content which would be useful for those of you who are learning English. So let me know whether you think this would be of interest. Obviously we would attract a whole new, I hope to attract a whole new set of listeners and readers. I would be writing, I would be recording, I would be making videos. Let me know if you think it's a good idea, if you're interested, and also any advice on what format for my blog, typepad or otherwise, and the share between simply text that I write versus podcasts that I record versus videos. So I'm looking for advice and comment. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.